This is The Last Word, and we have breaking news tonight about Special Prosecutor Robert Mueller's investigation of possible obstruction of justice committed by President Donald Trump. A new report tonight says that Robert Mueller is investigating how the president reacted to Attorney General Jeff Sessions recusing himself from the investigation of Russian interference in the 2016 election. The New York Times is reporting that Attorney General Sessions flew to Florida in March of 2017 to discuss the president's attempts to ban Muslims from entering the United States. The New York Times reports Mr. Sessions had flown to Florida because Mr. Trump was refusing to take his calls about a pressing decision on his travel ban. When they met, Mr. Trump was ready to talk, but not about the travel ban. His grievance was with Mr. Sessions. The president objected to his decision 2 days earlier to recuse himself from the Russian investigation. Mr. Trump, who had told aides that he needed a loyalist overseeing the inquiry, berated Mr. Sessions and told him he should reverse his decision, an unusual and potentially inappropriate request. Mr. Sessions refused. The confrontation, which has not been previously reported, is being investigated by the special counsel, Robert S. Mueller III, as are the president's public and private attacks on Mr. Sessions and efforts to get him to resign. The New York Times says that the special prosecutor's interest in Jeff Sessions' encounters with the president, quote, suggests that the obstruction investigation is broader than it is widely understood to be, encompassing not only the president's interactions with and firing of former FBI Director James B. Comey, but also his relationship with Mr. Sessions. Investigators have pressed current and former White House officials about Mr. Trump's treatment of Mr. Sessions and whether they believe the president was trying to impede the Russia investigation by pressuring him. The Attorney General was also interviewed at length by Mr. Mueller's investigators in January. And of the 4 dozen or so questions Mr. Mueller wants to ask Mr. Trump, 8 relate to Mr. Sessions. Among them, what efforts did you make to try to get him to reverse his recusal? The special prosecutor's interest in the president's dealings with Jeff Sessions is yet another reason why the president's TV lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, says he is more worried about the obstruction of justice investigation than possible collusion. On Sunday, when discussing the possibility of the president agreeing to an interview with Robert Mueller, Rudy Giuliani said this.
If everything could be worked out, then they would probably limit it to collusion and obstruction. The collusion part, we're pretty comfortable with because there has been none. The obstruction part, I'm not as comfortable with. I'm not. The president's fine with it. He's innocent. I'm not comfortable because it's a matter of interpretation, not just hard and fast, true, not true.
In that same interview, Rudy Giuliani made it clear that he expects the special prosecutor's investigation will lead to impeachment.
Eventually, the decision here is going to be impeach, not impeach. Members of Congress, Democrat and Republican, are going to be informed a lot by their constituents. So our jury is as it should be, is the American people.
Impeach or not impeach? Joining us now, John Howland, national affairs analyst for NBC News and MSNBC. He's the co-host and executive producer of Showtime's The Circus. Also with us, Harry Litman, former federal prosecutor and deputy assistant attorney general under President Clinton, and Jason Johnson, politics editor at TheRoot.com and an MSNBC contributor. John Howland, so Jeff Sessions is now a significant part of the obstruction of justice investigation.
And I think, you know, in retrospect, as the Times story notes, it's sort of crazy that we didn't focus on this earlier. I mean, people have obviously focused on the relationship between Trump and Sessions, and it's been contentious, and that Sessions has hung in there. You and I were exchanging a private conversation the other day about whether in some long narrative we eventually would look back and say Jeff Sessions was a hero of all this, having recused himself when he should have and resisted all of Trump's pressure. But we only knew about the public pressure. Now, because of the good folks at the New York Times and their great reporting, we now know about the private pressure. And I am not a lawyer. Harry Litman will be able to speak more eloquently to what precisely constitutes obstruction of justice than I can, but I know the corrupt intent has something to do with it, and I know that when you're going around, we have certain things we focused on a lot, Jim Comey, et cetera, but when you're going to your attorney general, who's done the absolutely right thing by recusing himself, when you publicly say, I need loyalty, I wish this guy was, there's a horrible decision, if he had told me he was going to do it, I wouldn't have made him attorney general, and then you're privately going to him and saying, I need you to reverse your decision. That's a problem.
And Jason Johnson, the New York Times report tonight also includes the president asking Jeff Sessions to resign, or trying to, doing it through Reince Priebus. And Jeff Sessions' chief of staff tells Reince Priebus if there's going to be a request for a resignation, it has to come directly from the president. And then Reince Priebus does nothing, and the president apparently forgets about it.
Well, yeah, this is one of the things that's always been a big irony about this president, and Trump in particular, Lawrence, that for somebody who got famous by telling people you're fired, we consistently hear that he's a bit cowardly when it comes to direct conflicts with people. He tries to do it through someone else. He gets Kelly to do it. He tries to do it through Reince. He won't necessarily go directly face to face and say it to my face and tell somebody what he wants unless he feels particularly empowered. And here's the thing about this. I've always agreed, strangely with Rudy Giuliani, that, impeachment, that may or may not happen, but the obstruction of justice case against this president is extreme. And when your flunky, flacky lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, is saying, I'm actually worried about obstruction of justice, that is a real sign why Trump has become so unhinged about this, because even the people around him can't keep lying to him enough to say, look, all the times you've been leaning on these people, that does look like obstruction. I don't think we can keep you from that.
Harry Litman, what is your legal reading of the New York Times report tonight that there's so much focus on Jeff Sessions in the obstruction of justice investigation?
It makes sense to me, and for the reasons John said. Look, it's been 100% clear from day one that, of course, Trump wanted to squelch the Russia investigation. His only defense has been that he's lacked the so-called corrupt intent, that he wasn't doing it for personal reasons. Now, when you think about other conduct, like the firing of Comey, there are different reasons you could try to proffer. But think about this with Sessions. And by the way, Sessions recuses because the department tells him he has to. So it's very straightforward and legally mandated. But what other reason could you say on behalf of Trump for why he thereafter is berating him and insisting he reverse the decision? It's obviously wanting personal loyalty, obviously wanting personal protection. It's that kind of protection for his own sake that leads directly to an inference of corrupt intent, and doesn't allow for the sorts of other inferences he could at least argue about for different conduct.
John Hauptman, we've noticed that Jeff Sessions has real friends among Republicans in the Senate. They certainly behaved that way during his confirmation. They got him through the challenges to his confirmation testimony, which some people thought included perjury.
Yep.
And here's another piece of the New York Times reporting tonight, which I think it contains a new fact that maybe we believed but did not quite yet know.
Right.
It said, Mr. Trump complains to friends about how much he would like to get rid of Mr. Sessions, but has demurred under pressure from Senate Republicans who have indicated they would not confirm a new attorney general. Now, John, I have not heard any Senate Republicans say that out loud publicly, but apparently they have said that to the president. They wouldn't confirm a new one.
Lawrence, I got to say, sometimes you and I are in sync, because when I read this story, it was one of the things that jumped out at me. I thought, that's a separate news story.
Yeah, it is.
That's a front-page story in the New York Times. Senate Republicans tell Trump if he gets rid of Sessions that they won't be able to confirm anybody else. Again, all of us have assumed that something like that was going on, but it's not been reported this way. And, Jeff Sessions has a lot of Republican friends, and weirdly, because of the stance he's taken and because of the way he's upheld the institutional integrity of the Justice Department on this issue, he's got a lot of friends in the Democratic Party right now, too. Trump realizes there's almost no one in the Senate who would vote for anyone else. And so Jeff Sessions' job, as much as Trump obviously hates him and obviously wants to get rid of him, has announced it to the world. Jeff Sessions is maybe the safest man in Washington, D.C. right now.
Yeah, and let's remember what Donald Trump, we have the tape of it. The New York Times did an interview with Trump about Sessions and about the recusal, and this one is on tape. Let's listen to what the president said last year.
Sessions should have never recused himself. And if he was going to recuse himself, he should have told me before he took the job, and I would have picked somebody else.
Now, Jason, for Robert Mueller, it has to sound really interesting that that you would have picked a different attorney general if your attorney general nominee had told you he was going to act according to the rules of the Justice Department.
Right, exactly. It's sort of like saying, like, well, if you would have told me that you won't bury dead bodies, I wouldn't have picked you as my lawyer, would I? I mean, that's essentially what the president is saying right now. And the issue, of course, is that, look, he has been saying things like this all along. And I have to mention, I thought that element of the New York Times story was interesting as well, because we've seen, at least publicly, that Republicans have bent over backwards in the Senate to say, we're kind of letting the president do whatever he wants. You had Mitch McConnell coming out and saying, well, there's no indicator that the president wants to get rid of Mueller, so we're not going to do anything about it. But if there is this push behind the scenes for Republicans saying, look, at least don't touch Jeff Sessions, he is at least someone that we respect, there may be that one small stopgap in the integrity of our justice system and our executive branch that we've all been hoping for, so that this investigation can continue. But again, the president's behavior is everything short of directly leaning on people in the White House and dangling them out the window and saying, do what I say or I'll fire you. And that part is obvious to anybody.
Let's listen to a Senate Republican, Marco Rubio, talking about the president's latest notion that his campaign was infiltrated, which, of course, it was not. That is a lie the president's telling. Let's listen to Marco Rubio's reaction to that.
I have seen no evidence that those people were part of an investigation on the campaign. If that exists, I would want to know about it. We should all know about it. And if that would be wrong, and we should do something about it. But up to now, what I have seen is evidence that they were investigating individuals with a history of links to Russia that were concerning. And that was appropriate if that's all that happened.
Harry Litman, that's Marco Rubio's view of what's appropriate. But the notion that a campaign cannot be investigated the way any other enterprise or any other group of people can be investigated has no legal grounding that I'm aware of.
Because it has no legal grounding. And in fact, what they're really trying to say is just a fiction. I don't think anyone in the Trump camp is trying to argue. What they're trying to argue with is the facts. They're trying to suggest it wasn't a routine counterintelligence investigation. It was a sort of, by the invocation of Watergate or J. Edgar Hoover, it was some kind of embedding of a political operative. That's just false, and it's just a rhetorical flourish that they know is designed to inflame people, but doesn't stand up to even the slightest scrutiny. Moreover, just as I just want to make another point, just as Sessions had to do what he did, the FBI, of course, had to do what it did. You hear from Papadopoulos through Australia that he's talking about Russia interference. You hear about Carter Page. It would have been derelict of them to leave it fallow and not try to investigate. And there's no attempt to try to respond to that by the Trump camp.
John Harlan, you see Marco Rubio finding his voice, at least on that particular point. And then when you play that against the backdrop of the New York Times reporting tonight that Senate Republicans, or the right Senate Republicans, have communicated to the president that if he gets rid of Jeff Sessions, they will not vote to confirm a replacement to Jeff Sessions, no matter who that is. We have reason to believe that there is a kind of communication going from Senate Republicans to this president that we, most of the time, know nothing about.
Correct, especially given the tenuousness of the relationship between Trump and McConnell that's been kind of off again and on again, and mostly off again throughout most of the term. I think it's important. Obviously, it's the case that it still remains, Rod Rosenstein still remains vulnerable. He's not getting this. We have no sense that Senate Republicans or anybody else on the Republican side is conveying to Trump the sense of the sanctity of Rod Rosenstein's job. So Trump still has a route to get to Bob Mueller if he wants to. But it's important if Sessions is safe. I think it's important. I want to focus on one thing very quickly. The high human drama of this, which is always the thing that I end up that draws me to a story. Jeff Sessions, the first U.S. senator to endorse Donald Trump. Yeah. He was mocked. He was scorned. His colleagues in the Senate thought he was an idiot. He signed up with Trump early. He was with him all throughout. He got this job, and then he followed the rules. And then Trump has abused him mercilessly, humiliated him, threatened him, tried to get him to quit, has pummeled him publicly, and now we know privately, for 15 months. Is Jeff Sessions going to go to bat for Donald Trump with Bob Mueller, or is Jeff Sessions going to stick the knife right in the shiv right in Donald Trump's back? Or should we say tell the truth? I think Jeff Sessions is going to tell the truth.
Jason, that's such a good point. Jeff Sessions, obviously a key witness in an investigation of the president, and the president has publicly done more than everything you could possibly imagine to taunt Jeff Sessions.
Yeah, he's insulted him, he's made fun of him, he's attacked him on Twitter. But this is what I said, Lawrence, like a couple weeks ago when I talked about grumble bragging from members of this administration. Oh, it's so terrible to work for Donald Trump. But they don't leave, do they? And they don't leave because at their core, they actually agree with a lot of the things that Donald Trump is doing, even if they don't like him, the person. Jeff Sessions is in favor of the travel ban. Jeff Sessions is just as much of a hawk on immigration. Jeff Sessions believes that Black Lives Matter is a terrorist organization. He is not going to leave this administration. And to be perfectly honest with you, while he may recuse himself, one, because the law required it, and two, because he didn't want to get himself in trouble, I don't think he'd ever turn. I don't think he'd ever flip on Donald Trump, because he likes the power and he likes the position he's in. And this is an opportunity for him to live out the white nationalist fantasies that he has been talking about under the guise of conservative policy for the last 35 years of his career. And I don't think there's anything that would make him turn on Donald Trump unless he thought it was him or Trump. And I don't think he's facing that decision yet.
Harry Litman, as you know, in under oath testimony and grand jury testimony and FBI interviews, there's a huge difference between I don't recall, I don't know, and answers the difference between I don't know and I think so. That takes an investigator from nowhere, the I don't know. When you switch that to an I think so, as a witness can, because that's within the range of their possible choice. That's in the space. It's in those spaces, in those interviews, where witnesses can try to protect someone or just not try to protect them at all.
You know, it's true, although, in fact, the most frequent perjurious statement anyone makes is, I don't recall. It's so frequent that people who do know are coached by lawyers to say that and think it's safe. And indeed, it's almost an impossible perjury case to bring. But yes, there's going to be a lot of nuance to the either endorsement of or undercutting of Trump. I would say, by the way, this is also true at the level of the Senate Republicans. Giuliani suggested it's a kind of a plebiscite that you go to the people on. In fact, this is really their highest duty under the Constitution to really make that sort of judgment. Trump has been banking on their not doing it for political reasons, but if the cards turn on him, it may well be that Senate Republicans, at least in certain numbers, are actually able to make a constitutional judgment, not simply a popularity question.
Harry Litman and John Heilman, thanks for joining us during this breaking news segment. Jason Johnson, please stay with us, because when we can come back, we're going to be discussing Roseanne's final episode, which turned out to be a Twitter episode this morning, which got her fired this afternoon.